So we're just recording. So if people, don't want to have their faces, we're not going to be putting it out to, anywhere kind of unusual. But if people don't want to have their faces or voices recorded, please just use the chat. Um, so the the webinar is really here to just introduce a one-day training that I do in the AAI. And that one-day training is really to give people an overview that the full training for the AAI is quite an exacting kind of offer. It's a 2-year training, which includes a solid 2-week immersion. So it really is designed to give people a very detailed understanding, not just of the application of the interview itself, but the transcription and scoring of that interview. And the reason that it's a 2-year kind of process is because it's really aimed at getting inter-rater reliability to a point of publishable quality. So it means that once you've done the 2 years, once you've qualified, then you're able to publish in peer-reviewed articles the results of your AAI assessment. So what we've been teaching for a number of years now is attachment repair models, and there are a number of them out in the community. I trained with one with Daniel P. Brown, which uses imagery to work through issues that are picked up through the AAI. There are other models around. Paul Heller has a treatment model. AEDP with Diana Fosher. Habib Davanloo has another model. So there are multiple models of the attachment repair work, but the AAI remains the gold standard of assessment in adult attachment disturbance. And again, it's not the only one. Patricia Crittenden has a model that people find useful, but is a lot more detailed. The AAI is really a powerful tool to assess the nature of the organisation of mind of the adult in view of their attachment orientation. So the one-day training is really aimed at summarising the core purpose and structure of the adult attachment interview. It's there to identify and differentiate the 4 primary AAI classifications, which is secure, autonomous, dismissing, preoccupied, and unresolved. The 5th, of course, is cannot classify, which is what we would describe as disorganised attachment. Demonstrate competence in administering, so that the actual nature of it's a structured interview, and many of you might be familiar with the nature of structured interviews. Some may not, but it's a structured set of questions that require that the interviewer pursues the questions in a systematic way. So if you're using this clinically, and you want to, kind of assess your client's attachment style, you need to be very, very specific with your client that they will experience you differently when you're administering the questionnaire. But it has to be followed without prompting, without any kind of therapeutic kind of intrusions. So it really is about, as Mary Main described it, and Eric Hess, you're trying to trick the unconscious into revealing itself in the interview. So you ask about history and you ask about background, but then you go immediately into asking for 5 adjectives that describe the relationship between your client and their mother and father at approximately the age of 5. So it's a memory retrieval exercise to see how the mind of the adult is organised around these predictive features. You have to identify ethical considerations when conducting an AAI, informed consent, interviewer distress, and limits of interpretation. Analysing excerpts of AAI transcripts is what we do in the training, really just trying to look at the nature of coherence and incoherence in the manuscript. And using the AAI classifications to inform preliminary case conceptualisation, integrating findings with your own clinical observations and history, and to demonstrate proficiency in summarising the findings. What we don't do in the training is go into the scoring of the AAI. That's certainly something that is heavily protected by the AAI Institute, and rightfully so. To actually come up with the numeric scorings are really what we're looking at in publishable research. But for the clinical work, the AAI can really help to guide and inform our clinical thinking and our judgment about attachment patterns. It's not a diagnostic tool per se, because attachment disturbance isn't a clinical disorder. It's a pattern of response and assumption about relationship that's established in a precognitive phase between 8 months and 20 months of age. It's a set of patterns of prediction about what to anticipate from relationship that are purely encoded in the body. That's what Bowlby describes as the internal working model. Slide, please. So the one-day training focuses on the application of the AAI in a clinical setting, and it doesn't, as I said, engage in the scoring of the AAI, and it doesn't focus on research in the AAI. I'm really interested in, just giving people some structure to help you utilise this as a tool in your clinical work. Slide, thanks. So people will be familiar, perhaps, with attachment, and it's the attachment system, the attachment pattern. So it shouldn't be thought about as a kind of a structure, a personality structure, but more an adaptive pattern. And it's a survival-based bond between an infant and a caregiver. The way humans are born, we're born like little marsupials. A 1-year-old can't survive by themselves. A 5-year-old would struggle to survive by themselves. So there's something biologically imprinted into humans at birth that make us bond with caregivers in such a way that bond will remain resilient for the next decade. So it's a survival bond, connecting infant and caregiver. And these, as I said, these attachment patterns are established between 8 months and 20 months of age. So this is where, kind of attachment disorders, or attachment disturbances, I should say, are really difficult to access through talk therapy. We get a little bit more kind of access since, the introduction of body-based therapies, in the last 20 years, where we're increasingly interested in how the body responds in the back and forth of therapy. But attachment, the internal working model, really can't be accessed through language. It can be accessed only through experience and approximation through language. It's all about limbic activation. The limbic system, the limbic brain, has its origins, in 200 million years of evolution. The limbic brain is associated with animal grouping patterns, flocks, herds, and then humans, clans. This limbic brain is the affective brain that helps individuals within a group interrelate to create congruence and coherence in that group, to create stability, under stress and threat. And the limbic brain is all about, feeling through relationship, nothing to do with thinking and organising. So the limbic brain of humans is very similar to the limbic brain of mice, or the limbic brain of hippopotamuses. So it's a very, very primitive way of organising information. And attachment provides a layer of regularity which adds to the infant's capacity to downregulate hyperarousal without hypoarousal. So, if you think that a baby is born motivated to survive, so it's in it's born with an HPA axis in some degree activated, and very little else is myelinized yet in the brain. So the baby's born motivated to survive, but the only kind of tool that it has to survive is a relationship with an adult. It can regulate and help it. So in those first, then that in the attachment stage, attuned relationship is all about helping that child develop sufficient coherence that they don't remain in hyperarousal, and then also don't go to the other alternative, which is available to some babies, to lapse into hypoarousal. So hypo is the kind of, the down-regulating, associated in adult behavior with things like dissociation and repression and different kind of mental mechanisms like that. Slide, please. So the history of attachment, begins, of course, with John Bowlby in at the end of the Second World War. Bowlby was a pediatric psychiatrist working at the Tavistock Institute in London, and they had a rich history of clinicians working there in the field of object relations. So psychodynamically informed clinicians. And at the end of the Second World War, during the blitzkriegs in industrial Britain, many children were sent out to country areas. They left their families. The parents stayed to kind of protect the cities, and the children, for their safety, were sent to live in, billeted out all over the country. And after the war, the expectation was, there'd be family reunification, that these children would, be welcomed back, and that everything would be, kind of in repair mode then, and healing mode. And what was discovered instead was this high incidence of youth delinquency. Teenagers that were really, really acting out, and that's Bowlby's very first published study was on a case study of 50 London delinquents. And what he found was that rupturing of their connection with family early in life had impacted on these young men he was working with, to the point where they seemed to lack empathy, seemed to lack relational connection. And so that's where attachment therapy, or attachment research, began with Bowlby. He then had a graduate student from the US, Mary Ainsworth, come and work with him, and Ainsworth was really the person responsible for systematizing research into attachment. And she was really interested in children's bonding with parents, and so she set up the strange situation process whereby there's a structured observation of the dyadic interaction between a mother and a child in a clinician's room, where the mother leaves, mother returns, and observing how the baby responds. And that really systematized the understanding of attachment, but also there's a system of languaging that came up. We've got two types of languaging in the attachment research, just to confuse us all. The infant attachment talks about anxious avoidant attachment. The adult literature talks about dismissing and preoccupied. They're talking about the same things, but in a different language. There's a 75% correspondence between strange situation outcomes and parents' AAI outcomes, and there are some long-term studies that have really kind of followed intergenerational patterns here. And what has also emerged is that attachment disturbance becomes intergenerational. If you haven't had an opportunity for either primary secure attachment, or in your adult life repaired to create what's described in the literature as earned secure attachment, then there's a likelihood that you're going to transmit some of those attachment issues to the next generation. There's varying outcome data, but most studies um, return a conservative assessment of something approaching 50% of the adult population in the West having some form of attachment disturbance or an insecure attachment pattern. So it's not like this is a minor issue in our culture, and it underrides a lot of clinical presentations. Someone with a preoccupied attachment style, for instance, will often exhibit anxiety-based symptoms. Someone with a dismissing might orient more to depressive type orientations, and the really terrible one, which is the absence of a predictive pattern, which is disorganized attachment. That maps on virtually 100% onto conditions such as borderline personality disorder or schizoaffective disorder. And you can find that kind of research in the work of Bateman and Fonagy, amongst others, who done extensive research into attachment. So measurement of attachment, strange situation is the primary child attachment tool. And the AAI is Mary Main's production. So Mary Ainsworth was a student of Bowlby. Mary Main and Mary Ainsworth had worked together. Mary Ainsworth actually attended the very first AAI training with Mary Main to kind of create this kind of continuity across generations in this research. And Mary Main is actually a linguist. She only passed away a year or two ago, but her primary kind of training was in language and language acquisition and language presentation, which is why the AAI has such an orientation to the specifics of language. Carol George worked with Mary Main for a while and developed another assessment tool, the projected picture system, that has strengths and weaknesses. And again, Patricia Crittenden had done some work with Mary Main and again developed her own model, the dynamic maturation model, which has both an assessment tool and a treatment tool. But the assessment tool renders a lot more detail than the AAI. But for people working in the field, it's an extensive training similar to the AAI training. The reflective functioning scale that Fonagy developed in his work with Bateman around their approach to attachment disturbance through the British National Mental Health Network. So it's a publicly funded work that they do specifically with people diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder. They've developed the reflective functioning scale to measure aspects of mental functioning, inspired, I would suggest, by the work that Mary Main had done initially in really mapping the way that adult consciousness and adult representation, adult emotional representation is influenced by these early developmental features. The ECR has a number of different variants. That's a kind of a tick and flick model. Doesn't have high reliability in relation to the other models, but it can help to create a bit of a thumbnail. As I said, it's not a well validated measure, but it can give some indication, can be a useful tool. But it's the AAI is probably the most detailed and certainly gives the most information about the organisation mind. And as I said, the full versions is a 2-year training. But I think, like really getting interested in the tool, the nature of the interview and just the interpretation can help render some good, solid data for you in a clinical setting. So the purpose of the AAI is to really provide a detailed description of attachment-related childhood experiences. So it asks in quite a lot of detail, and in order to kind of generate the best outcomes, the interview starts with calming, relaxing, embodying, so slowing the client down, and then having the client connect with memories of themselves as a 5-year-old. Sometimes people can't go that far back, so the instruction is relaxed, so somewhere between 5 and 12. You can't work with memory construction beyond 12 because you're then engaging in an adolescent mind, which is influenced by a whole lot of other interpersonal processes that are not attachment related. The AAI elicits patterns of language, which include coherence, narrative consistency, and productivity. And it's coherence both in mind and transcript that are probably the singular most important aspects of the AAI transcript. Just to make it clear, what we do in administering the AAI is we ensure that the client is okay with it being audio recorded. So, if they're not uncomfortable with that, then we can't really pursue the AAI. So we record it. That recording is then transcribed into a document in which each line in the transcript is numbered, and all non-verbal cues that are discernible in the transcript are also transcribed. So that will be delays. So, you'll have, in some cases, depending on the attachment style, you might have long delays where there's silence for a few seconds or, up to half a minute. That needs to be specified in the transcript. Non-verbal, yeah, all of those sort of non-verbal intrusions need to be transcribed. Just the way that people will sometimes just trail off a sentence at the end of a question response. That, yeah, I did a lot of work, and yeah, my mother was really. All of that needs to be detailed in the transcript. So it's not just a matter of kind of articulating what's said. It's really articulating how it's said, and that needs to be really detailed in the transcript, because that will inform your interpretation of their organisation of mind. So Eric Hess, who's Mary Main's husband and who's worked with her on this project for, as you can see there, for close to 3 decades at least, describes the AAI as an interview-based method of classifying a parent's state of mind with respect to attachment, an adult state of mind. It's a research-based tool. We adapt it to clinical utility through the 3 pillars model that Dan Brown had developed in his supervision group at Harvard, through an imagistic kind of model of generating conceptual ideal parents who are very different to the real parents. This engages the imaginative system rather than the memory system, so have to make it very, very clear that in doing work in this fashion, we're not trying to create false memories. We're trying to engage the imagination to create body-based experiences that were either not established in the attachment period or were established in the wrong way. So, if someone has an experience of in the AAI of parents being very dismissing, very busy, not really attending, the imaginal work is really around a parents who are there for you, attuned to you in just the way you need. And you work through a script that way. Other methods of working with attachment use the therapist as the projective alternative model. So the therapist becomes the projective ideal parent, and that's worked through in more of a transferential model. That's what you will find if you go down a training path with Habib Devanlu's work or Diana Fosh's work. So, as mentioned, the administration of the AAI is a structured 20-question interview that takes somewhere between 45 and 90 minutes. So they don't tend to go to 90 minutes that often, and the length of the interview is often itself a fairly raw indicator of attachment style or attachment pattern. Someone with a dismissing attachment pattern will have a transcript that it could be as short as 12 pages, whereas a preoccupied or disorganized pattern might go to 60 pages. So there's quite a variation. So if you are going to run someone through the AAI in session, you really do need to leave a couple of hours, because you want to make sure that you follow the protocol itself, and the protocol's generally available on the internet. You can, just Google the adult attachment interview, and you can find copies of it. But you specifically work through it as an interviewer rather than as a clinician. So you need then, if you're doing it with a client that you've been working with, particularly, you need to leave time at the end of the interview to debrief and to, kind of process their experience of you in a different manner. Really important to follow the structure and not to get sidetracked and to move off. There are some probing questions, some expansion questions that are built in. There's two AAIs that you can download. One is a basic one, and then there's another one that has a bit more of an expanded text and invites more of the probing questions and expanding questions and explanation for them. And as I've said a few times now, during the application of the AAI, the administration of the AAI, there's no therapeutic conjecture or support that you can offer, because that will relationally displace their memory retrieval process. So you're really there to be neutral. If they're upset, of course, stop. Do you need a tissue? Do you need a break? Do you need a glass of water? Of course, you can, support in those kind of ways, but you don't kind of offer empathetic conjecture or that kind of support, because you'll create a different valence. You will become then a projective object or a therapeutic presence, rather than someone trying to interview the memory system. And so this can be difficult when you have an established relationship. So if you have colleagues that have an understanding of the application of the AAI, then sometimes it can be more efficient to have someone else do the interview itself, and then provide them the recording of the interview, and audio recorded and transcribed with the lines numbered. The reason that we number the lines is that when it comes to assessing, it just makes it easier to summarize. You'll have evidence of some of the aspects that determine dismissing or preoccupying. You'll be able to say, there was a maternal intrusion, line 107. So it's easier to kind of, refer back, and also to kind of build your pattern of interpretation of their attachment style. It renders a 5-stage, a 5-part classification system. So 5 types of secure attachment, 3 types or 4 types of dismissing attachment. So secure is, an adult who's well regulated and independent, but also can enjoy intimacy. Dismissing attachment is the individual who is more dominated by hypoarousal in relation to relationship. So that'll be the person who is autonomous, doesn't need relationship, very, very independent, and depending on the type of dismissing, either reduces the importance and value of relationship, or downright derides relationship. They talk about a tough childhood, but one that made me the person I am today. That kind of thing. The preoccupied type is the hyper-aroused presentation. So the way that one nice metaphor that Mary Main uses um, um, for preoccupation is like the person who's reaching out for a glass of water on the table in front of them, but whose hand never quite gets to the glass. It's this kind of constant reaching out to experience relationship, but because the internal working model is one where they've never been met, they've never been attuned, so the adult is constantly pursuing. People that are familiar with the Gottman's work would be familiar with things like the pursuer distancer dynamic in an intimate relationship, where the preoccupied style of person is just pursuing all the time, fearful of abandonment, that kind of thing. Cannot classify is the disorganized type. Cannot classify is actually the absence of a predicted pattern. So the first three are they establish internal working models that one, there's an assumption that the world is safe and that relationships are in some way going to be positive. The second is relationships will let me down, so I'm not going to make myself vulnerable. The third is I predict that I'll be abandoned or let down, but I have to then work really hard for relationship. The disorganized is where there is no predicted pattern. The person swings between hypo and hyper arousal. It's a very unstable kind of presentation. And anyone that's worked with borderline personality disorder would be familiar with that kind of swinging assessment of relationship. At one point, someone's idealized, then derogated. You're a great therapist, you're hopeless, all in the same session. It's that kind of unstable prediction about relationship that's embodied from this pre-cognitive phase in the internal working model. Unresolved for trauma and grief is the fifth classification. And this is, whilst when you look at a transcript, unresolved looks similar to disorganized, but the difference is that it's only disorganized around certain events and memories. So you might have a transcript that's predominantly secure or dismissing or preoccupied, but then when you come to an event, so remembering remembering corporal punishment, then all of a sudden the mind just goes offline and becomes vague or dismissing or just in that event. And then you get past that or that relationship, then you get past that and they return to the pre-existent pattern or in the so it differs from disorganized in that it's intermittent. Thanks. And then the utility of the classification system when it's scored, but you can still get a kind of quality of this without going into the detailed scoring matrix. Three types of dismissing attachment, which one is severely dismissing, in which there's just a lack of detail. One of the key features is a lack of memory. Can you tell me about your mother being loving as a child? Yeah, sure. She'd make me a sandwich when I got home from school. Anything more? But no, I can't remember. No, that was it. Really, really a lot of paucity in detail, and these tend to be quite short. The DS2 is more devaluing and derogatory dismissing. It was hard, but it was tough. I'm not weak. I don't need any of that kind of soft stuff. I've been independent since I was 16. It's that kind of just recognition that they don't have a reliance on an attachment system. And the DS3, there are two versions of it, but they're restricting in relation to attachment, but less severe than the other two. Then when we look at secure attachment, we find that there are five variants. The first two are slightly dismissing, but showing sufficient security. And what we mean by that is that in the transcript, whilst they're being interviewed, the adult's able to reflect back on their attachment system. They're able to talk about, look, I've got a good relationship these days, but back then, it was really tough. My parents didn't know how to love me. So you're seeing someone applying a kind of a reflective functioning around the impact of attachment on their present work, on their present relationship. So that would be F1 and F2. F3 is prototypically secure. That's where, you've just had a dream run from childhood. Your parents were attuned. There were no significant traumatic events that weren't processed and supported and lived through. So quite a beautiful opportunity if you're lucky enough to have had that from childhood. Then the F4 and F5 have qualities of preoccupation, but again have sufficient groundedness and reflection. And ultimately, coherence is what we're looking for, coherence of self and coherence of manuscript, for them to fall into a secure with some preoccupied features. And then there are three forms of preoccupation. One that's very passive, and this is filled with discontinuities. Mum was like, kind of, yeah. Like when you actually read the vagueness, it's really striking when you're inviting people to reflect in memory. Then you've got preoccupied angry, which is where someone's really reflecting on a memory, but the emotion associated with that childhood memory intrudes into the present, and they start getting angry in telling the story. That's a really kind of strong indicator of preoccupied angry. Preoccupied fearful is a very rare classification, and there's been a lot of talk about merging that more into cannot classify or disorganized attachment. But I've only had one case of preoccupied fearful in my working life, and that was it's when people are focused on traumatic events that they've experienced, and that becomes then the feature of the transcript, is constant referencing of trauma, with this kind of unpacking of coherence around that recall. So when we look at the multiple levels of attachment, the working through of the transcript involves quite a lot of work. This is why it's a time-consuming model of working, the AAI, but it renders so much rich detail. And I think once you get used to it, once you've used it, it really sharpens your understanding of organizational mind in general, because you start really seeing the way that adults' minds are informed by unresolved or unintegrated developmental experience, or the passage through to integration of that experience. So you do an initial read through of the manuscript, just kind of beginning to end, and then you look at scales for inferred experiences with parents. And in the full training, these scales are numerically scored. In the training, I tend to just look at what the features are rather than the scores for those features. We then do, and that's all kind of noted in the marginalia of the transcript. Then we go through a third reading for scales for patterns of organised states of mind. We're looking then for scales for unresolved and disorganized states of mind, and then you look more broadly at the descriptors of the different classifications. So it's quite a complex, time-consuming review, but as I said, it gives you such a detailed picture. Thanks. So the AAI, the first questions are really designed to engage the subconscious. And then we go through asking for 5 adjectives. And these adjectives are asking for the adult to retrieve from their memory the nature of the relationship between them and, firstly, their mother, then their father, or if they've got 2 mothers or 2 fathers, each parent, or if there's only one parent, whether there's a significant other, such as a grandparent. So you're looking at, any kind of evidence of binary, and you're asking for them to describe the relationship between them as a 5, 6, 7-year-old and their mother. 5 adjectives that describe the relationship, not that describe their parent, but the relationship between them and the parent. Once you've got 5 adjectives for the mother, you then go through and expand, and you ask for examples of, if the adjective was loving, can you tell me, give me an example of loving is from your memory. And that's where, you really get to see how that memory retrieval is working, because lack of memory is a real key indicator of a dismissing attachment style. Over information that's not targeted is a classic kind of example of a preoccupied style, for instance. There's then a series of questions such as describing the parental behaviour when you were sick, when you're injured, or when you're distressed. So what we're really doing is really getting a detail of this adult's retrieval of memories around the later attachment, the reinforcement of attachment behaviour. And this is all used to shape the clinical application. So the AAI helps us to develop a therapeutic treatment plan. The way we work, it's an inversion of the initial text that a lot of our training is based on, the 2016 Brown-Elliott book, which uses collaboration, metacognition, and ideal parent figure protocol as a way to structure the therapeutic intervention. But as I said, there are other therapies that people can apply as well. And what we're trying to invoke in treatment using the outcome data from the AAI are to create in the adult and to identify what's missing of the 5 conditions of secure attachment to begin, and then to repair. So protecting, attuning, soothing, express delight, and unconditional support for exploration. These are the 5 conditions that we believe constitute what Bateman and Fonagy would describe as epistemic trust, a quality that your consciousness occupying your body is safe, and that predicting relationship is something that it will be a positive thing. That's when the 5 conditions are met and established. And this is what we're looking for in terms of therapeutic change. So got a couple of minutes. If anyone's got a question, you feel free to ask or to put it into chat. If there is anything. Yeah, Maria.
Yes, so I'm wondering, with this one-day workshop, how will it enable me to better interpret the self-administered attachment questionnaire, if it will at all, or to, when I've given it to clients to do themselves, sometimes it'll come back and it, to my opinion, it doesn't look like it's quite accurate. Even at times they've said some of it fits, some of it doesn't. Is this workshop something that would enable me to read into that a little bit more and to pick up certain things in sessions?
Yeah. The AAI, you can't self-administer. It requires feedback and relating. So, I think if someone's doing it by themselves, you're not going to get, a really strong picture. The workshop is really, we spend some time in how to administer and then how to interpret the transcript. So, with a bit of support, a little bit of supervision, you should be able to render a reasonable sketch of the attachment system from the AAI. It doesn't give you, we're not trying to teach the scoring of it. If you really want to get into the detail of the AAI, then, go and do the 2-year training. And, the Institute's, very, very good at delivering that work. But yeah, you should get a good working knowledge from doing the AI.
Oh, hi, Nigel. Thanks for that.
Yeah,
I'm
that's it.
looking at doing some psychedelic assisted therapy.
Uh-huh.
I just recently did your online course and I enjoyed that very much.
Excellent.
And the question I have is I'm thinking of using components of the adult attachment interview informally in either screening or preparation, like particularly looking for disorganized patterns, if not to screen people out, but also to be
Totally.
forewarned and forearmed for issues to look for
Yeah,
very, particularly in the initial dosing sessions when
totally.
things would come up. It would help frame
Yeah.
an understanding of what's happening. Do you think that would be helpful?
Yeah, yeah. That I mean, the only kind of issue would be, getting the time in assessment to kind of run the interview. But if you've got that hour available, I think it's a very very kind of useful tool. The to send someone into a non-ordinary state and discover that they have a significant attachment disturbance, can create some issues in integration. And also, yeah, you're forewarned in terms of what phenomena might arise during a session. I think it'd be a very, very helpful tool.
How about like informally incorporating elements of the questioning, particularly around the sort of disorganized kind of aspects to
Yeah,
tune into that, to ask questions to help. I imagine with the disorganized people, it would be very easy to ask certain questions and have those things come up um, to give you a flavor of what's going on.
yeah. I think what you've got to be very conscious of in using this as a tool is that you're really trying to elicit memory structures
Mm.
that are based on precognitive events. And so you need to slow someone down significantly, relax them into, the capacity to sort of start to retrieve memory. The key to the AAI are the five adjectives and the
Mm.
explication of
Right.
the five adjectives, and then some of the follow-up questions about response to being sick, response to being upset as a child. They would be the core questions that you'd be wanting to kind of
Mm.
integrate, and they are again. If we have to get people into engagement with their memory system. So slow them down, relax into
Mm.
it, and tell me a little bit about it becomes important.
I'd be thinking the ones that are very sort of disorganized, the issue would be very close to the surface. So as you start to talk about them, I'd be thinking they'd probably come up fairly quickly. What do you think that would be right?
Well, they come up often through the way that people talk. So
Mm.
they'll come up in ways like, "Oh, my mother was really like she made me so angry."
Mm.
They start, but you'll only get that if you can slow it down into affective memory retrieval, because
Oh, okay.
the the internal working model is built in sensate and affective phenomena. It's not
Mm.
built in cognitive phenomena. So if you're asking them what was it like, what you're going to get is a top-down interpretation of the phenomena
Yes,
rather
yes.
than relaxing into the rendering of it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
just
Good point.
noticing,
Thank you.
um, Zachary, can you say what researchers were using the transference model to establishing IP? What researchers were using the transference model? Not using transference to establish ideal parent, but to therapeutically intervene with an attachment disturbance. So that's the Diana Fosher and her AEDP model, and Habib Devanloo from Tavistock. And I forgot his acronym off the top of my head, but Devanloo, started a kind of a treatment model, and then Fosher developed from his model. Bateman and Fonagy use mentalization-based therapy as a way to treat their interpretation of attachment disturbance in adults, but only in two clinical subgroups that they work with: borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder. So we've come to an end now. So thank you, everyone, for coming along, and hopefully you got something useful out of this session. And there's just a scannable code there if you're interested in coming along to the training in a couple of months' time. They aim to give you just a working knowledge of the AAI in a day. So thanks, everyone.